Welcome to the Nature for Life Hub and to this session, which is on the role of system change as we address nature-based solutions. Thanks so much to the System Change Lab who organized this session and to UNDP who is running the entire Nature for Life Hub program, which is so brilliant. So what exactly is system change? Well, there are complicated ways of explaining it and there are simple ways of explaining it. The complicated ways involve a lot of mathematics that comes out of the field of biology and ecology. But let me tell you the simple way of explaining it. The simple way is simply that as we look at these big problems we're trying to solve in nature or in industrial decarbonization or almost anything, we need to look at the big picture. There are rarely silver bullets. There are rarely single entry points that will solve the problem. There's a lot of interrelationship among different elements, and there are a lot of players that need to get involved. It sounds very complicated, but actually it's fairly intuitive. But one implication of this is that we need to work together as a team much better. No individual organization, no government, no private corporation, no NGO, no scientist on their own can solve this. We need to work together. Let me give you an example. So for example, if we care about tropical deforestation in Southeast Asia, we have to care about palm oil. Palm oil is responsible for 3/4 of the deforestation. So a sort of simple approach would be to say, well, clearly the government of Indonesia or Malaysia needs to pass a law which says no more destroying a virgin forest in order to plant palm oil. But actually that doesn't work. That's been tried. It's very difficult for almost any government to make that work. What we really need to do is think about the entire system, which includes those that are planting, smallholders, estates, but also those that are purchasing, those that are in Singapore purchasing. They need to know how can they distinguish between honorably harvested palm oil and dishonorably. Well, that needs a scientific approach. That requires satellite technology. That requires that you are able to say of the 1,000 palm oil mills in Southeast Asia, the following 300 actually are dishonorable. So you need that kind of information. But then, of course, you need those that are using the palm oil. You need the manufacturers. You need the retailers. And actually, you need those of us that use palm oil. Most people use palm oil 4 or 5 times a day. You brush your teeth, you put on makeup, you eat margarine, all of which have palm oil in. We need to know the story and we need to have the different players in place. And the great thing is that whilst this sounds complicated, once you start thinking about it clearly, it can work. And that's precisely why deforestation in Indonesia has now shrunk so much. Not solved, but it's shrunk because there is now a system-wide approach. Now there's another important theme in system change, and that is the idea of a tipping point. We all know of tipping points that happen fairly quickly. We know that literally in 10 years, the views on same-sex marriage changed. They flipped, if you like. That same idea of tipping point happens actually in systems, believe it or not. They can move much more quickly than you think as people change their behavior, as new technologies come in, as price points are crossed, and you can get a sort of a tipping point, a flip that's unexpected. And I encourage you all to look at the website of the System Change Lab, and in particular to read the report they've just brought out, which is really important. They look at 40 major transitions that need to take place this decade and the next decade, and they ask the question, how goes the battle? How are they doing? And which of those are approaching tipping points? And what is the special sauce that will actually help get you across those tipping points? So there's a lot of learning that's going on. And you can look at any of the issues we're dealing with and apply the same approach. Consider the second most polluting species on the planet. It's cattle. We're the most polluting. They're the second, and they're polluting mainly because of us, of course. And what's the problem? The problem is huge methane emissions. The problem is the fact that as we eat more beef and we drink more milk, we have to expand the land. And the deforestation takes place. Agriculture is responsible for 1/3 of all greenhouse gases, and livestock alone is responsible for about 15%. So this is a big issue. What to do about solving it? Well, for example, you can reduce methane emissions by all kinds of food additives. There's a technological side of this, there's a behavioral side of this, there's a policy side. You need to bring carbon markets in to finance it. But in addition to that, there's a solution with regard to cattle needing less land. The average cattle in much of Latin America has more than a hectare each. Actually, you could have 4 or 5 cattle on a hectare, but you would need to change policies, you'd need to have clearer land use tenure arrangements, and above all, you would need to use modern approaches to pasture enrichment, and even some modern techniques such as radio collars on cattle. So again, you start thinking about the entire system. And then, of course, what you really want over time is to shift towards more plant-based diets. If one eats beef, one uses 20 times as much land, 20 times as much water, and emits 20 times as much greenhouse gases as if one eats the same amount of nutrition on plant-based sources. And so over time, one wants to also think about how do we change behavior and how do we change tastes? And that again is part of the overall system. So the great news is that increasingly the community of policymakers, corporate leaders, NGOs, scientists are starting to think the same way about system change. We need to diagnose each of these systems, and we need to think about where do we inject what kind of action at what time to bring the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. Such an exciting time, such intellectual ferment going on right now, and the great thing is we're starting to see that now come down into real policies, real actions, and real investments. Thank you very much.